This afternoon's session is actually looking at the electrification of road transport. And this session is in partnership with the Electric Power Research Institute. What we're really going to be focusing on this afternoon is understanding how innovation of smart charging in EVs can actually help to deal with issues like electricity grid congestion, minimise peak loads, and defer what we're all really concerned about, which is higher infrastructure costs. There's the opportunity involved in integrating EV batteries from passenger cars and buses and trucks. There's a lot that we've got to discuss. So the first keynote speech this afternoon is actually going to be from Arina Anisie, an analyst on renewable energy innovation with IRENA. She's actually been working for quite a long time on the innovation workstream in IRENA, looking at innovations for the integration of renewable energy into power systems. Arina.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thank you, Felicia, for the introduction. It's an honor to be here today to set the scene for this exciting session where we will dive a bit deeper on the electrifying road transport and what does it mean for the transport sector, but also on the impact on the power grid. You have been heard many times today already. We launched in June this year our flagship report on innovation landscape for smart electrification, which includes 100 innovations that can play a role in transforming and decarbonizing the energy use sector with smart electrification strategies. It has a toolbox on power to mobility, a toolbox on power to heat and cooling, and a toolbox on power to hydrogen. And I will dive deeper with you here on the toolbox on power to mobility. And we'll present what is inside to set the scene for this session. Electric vehicles are the key technology for decarbonizing road transport. That is clear. Today we have on the road around 10 million electric vehicles globally, and we need to reach more than 2 billion by 2050 to be aligned with Paris Agreement. All these electric vehicles are adding electricity demand to the grid, and an estimation is that all electric vehicles will add up to 4,000 terawatt-hour by 2040, up to only 100 terawatt-hour in 2021. So 40 times more electricity that will be demanded from the grid for the transport sector. That can pose a significant challenge on the grid, create congestion and more infrastructure required, if not smart charging. Smart charging and smart electrification strategy will help us to harness the synergies between renewable electricity in the system and the batteries of grid-connected electric vehicles. So smart charging of electric vehicles can, on one side, integrate variable renewable in the grid, and on the other side also help decrease peak load, decrease grid congestion, minimize grid investments needed. Here I have a graph from a study done on the German grid on what is the potential of smart charging of electric vehicles in decreasing peak load. And we see that the result of the study with V1G smart charging, it's 13% decreased in peak load, which is quite a lot and can minimize a lot of investments in the grid. But for smart charging and smart electrification of transport sector, we need systemic innovation. This you already heard today, but I will reiterate because it's our approach to innovation, that innovation needs to go beyond technology, and we also should innovate in market design and regulation. We need a lot of innovation on how to plan and operate the systems we have, and new innovation and business models emerging. This is what we call systemic innovation, which is meanings that matching and leveraging synergies in innovation in all parts of the systems, both in power system and end-use sectors, and include all relevant actors and stakeholders. Only by doing that we can have practical on-the-ground solution that can actually work. Here it's a landscape of what we have in the Power to Mobility toolbox. We have mapped 35 key innovations that can help policymakers create a strategy to smart electrify the transport sector. It includes not only innovations in electric vehicles and batteries, but also in different types of charging infrastructure, in digital technologies, which we already heard they are very important, but also includes innovations in the regulation and in the market design electricity market design to send the right signals to the drivers and to the all grid connected assets to behave smartly and flexibly. Also innovation in regulation for charging infrastructure that needs to be deployed, and a lot of innovation in strategic planning and smart operation of these two sectors that were previously different, and now we are coupled, transport and power systems. And of course, a lot of innovations that emerge also in business models to create new services, both for the transport sector and for the mobility sector, for the power sector. We also know that electrifying and smart electrifying passenger cars, it's not the same as electrifying commercial vehicles, including both light-duty vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles, and also it's very different strategy from electrifying 2- and 3-wheelers, for example, which is one of the main transport segment in developing economies. So we include in this toolbox innovations that are suited for all these transport segments to be able to tackle all these different particularities in the 5 transport sector you see on the right side. So with all these 35 innovations we identified for power to mobility, we also created a guideline to guide the policymakers how to pick and choose and to create their strategies that is best suited for what they need for their power system and for what transport sector they want to electrify. And for that we created 3 kits. Essential kits, it basically includes the innovations that are essential for starting to build the strategy. Then there is smart charging kit, which includes the innovations that are adding on how to charge, how to add the smartness and how to make the electric vehicles be smart charged and what are the incentives needed. Here there are 2 main strategies to go bidirectional charging or unidirectional charging. And last but not least, there is the mobility segment kit, which includes innovations according to whether they want to electrify a fleet or passenger vehicles, which is also quite different. So this is the guidelines and the toolbox that you can find in our landscape report and also in the digital toolbox that was launched today, and it's outside, you can also play with. This is just a small snapshot of what is inside this report. I will end with a slide on the blind spot. There are few issues that we identify that are often overlooked by policymakers when creating this smart charging strategy for road transport that we want to shed more light on. Just to mention a few, one is that smart charging does not necessarily mean bidirectional charging. There is a lot of value that can be harnessed in V1G, unidirectional charging, and sometimes that is enough depending on the power system you are talking on. And also another one that I quite like, it's the fact that mobility trends need also to be considered in electrification strategies, and we often see a shift from the owning the electric vehicles to shared mobility, and this is also something to consider because this also decreases the parking times of the cars and so on. So I will end here, and I am looking very much forward for the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Our second keynote of this afternoon's discussion is from Siva Gunda, who's the Vice Chair of the California Energy Commission. You'll remember him from this morning. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing more about how California is advancing e-mobility and smart charging.
Good afternoon again, everyone. So I'm going to just touch base a little bit, build off of what Arina just spoke. I think she set the stage really well on the high-level strategy and toolkit for mobility. And what I'm going to add to that is the electricity part of it and how to keep a reliable system and giving a case study of what's happening in California. So to just start at 30,000-foot level for California, as we think about decarbonization, the transportation sector is about 50%. So you have about 41% straight out from transportation, but when you look at the refinery industry that supports it, we look at about 50%, and it's a key element of that is really electrifying. So that kind of led to the climate agenda in California, primarily three parts that I want to elevate here. One is the carbon neutrality. So California has a carbon neutrality goal by 2045. By 2045 also, because much of our decarbonization is based on electrification, supporting 100% of the retail sales with zero carbon resources by 2045. And finally, the EO N7920, which requires all new sales of vehicles in California after 2035 to be all electric. So with that ambitious goal, the state has put in a bunch of money, and so we had a pretty bold bipartisan package of about $53 billion last year, looking at a variety of strategies around climate. But as you see there, for zero-emission vehicles, primarily charging, we have about $10 billion. There's also on clean transportation, specifically the transit side. Along with that comes the buildings, the building decarbonization, which is something that I want to raise to you all. And finally, what we call the clean energy and reliability package, which is $8.2 billion in that. That's really around making sure the grid is reliable as we move forward, given how critical grid is for the decarbonization strategy of California. So the ZEV market share then, looking at transportation as one of the core elements, we have been outpacing our goals. So by 2025, our goal was to hit about 1.5 million vehicles, electric vehicles sold in California. We have reached that about 20 months ahead of schedule. So we continue to add at pace. And earlier this quarter, the first quarter of this year and the second quarter, we had about 25% of all new sales in California coming from electric vehicles. So then, given that transportation then has to be underpinned with kind of good, solid, reliable, clean energy, so this is kind of just the progress of California over the last decade, primarily focusing. So we have had tremendous success with bulk side solar as well as behind the meter solar and storage. So just to highlight a few things, California is right now about 60% zero carbon, largely coming from solar and wind and hydro and some nuclear. And a big part of our growth over the last 3 years has been storage, bulk storage. So as you see there, in 2020, roughly, we were at 200 megawatts of bulk storage. We were at 5,600 megawatts earlier this year, and we are expected to get to 8,000 megawatts by the end of the year. 6,500 of that is on the bulk side, and 1,500 is behind the meter, which is really to support the grid transition. Some key metrics there: solar generation has gone up 20-fold over the last decade. The wind generation has gone up 63%. But the big one there for us is natural gas, and we need to continue to decline it, and it's about 20% decline over the last 10 years. So we have built a lot, and we have to continue to build. This is our 2045 goal here. We need about 183 gigs of new generation on the system. We're about 30 gigs on the way there. And as you see there, we still will rely a lot on solar and wind, but there is a significant amount of storage. We're looking about 50 gigs of storage to support the system. So before I kind of pivot into transportation, I just wanted to kind of then talk about, we're moving towards, rapid electrification in a grid, but, how do we keep the grid reliable given 3 big climate change impacts we are seeing in California: droughts, extreme heat, and fire. All 3 risks are happening concurrently in California. And just kind of then thinking about how do we plan for that in going towards our grid planning. So this is a chart here. What you're looking here is some of the temperature distributions as you go forward to 2100. 2 things of note there is the length and the intensity. So you will continue to see the overall temperatures going up. The median might not change that much, but you'll continue to see tails of distribution, and the length of those heat waves could be long, right? So right now it's 3 to 4 days. In the next 10 years, it might be 10 days of heat we'll see, and carrying the grid with a lot of electrification on the grid through those 10 days will be incredibly hard. Same thing, we have what we call a 5-year cycle, water cycle in California, a big water year and 3 to 4 years of drought and so on. But those things, the droughts are kind of becoming larger and the amount of water we get is getting shorter. And finally, the wildfire threats. California is a net importing state, so we import a lot of energy from our neighbors. We rely on that energy. And that picture is from 2021, July, when there was a fire in our adjacent state, Oregon, that knocked out about 4,000 megawatts of transmission lines. So this is something that California has to prepare as we move forward. Here's kind of then how it translates on the grid. So what you're seeing here is the same day, September 6th, 2022 and 2023. September 6th, 2022 was our record peak in California. What you see in that little red circle on the top on the blue line is when we basically sent a text message to 28 million people in California asking for them to turn off their lights because we were so close. We were on our way to 53,000 megawatts on our balancing area. And a year later, same day, we were at 33,000. That's a 20,000 gig, right? 20,000 megawatts, a 20 gig fluctuation. And that's something we really need to think about as we are electrifying and making sure we keep the system affordable, but also reliable. So what do? You actively plan. So improving grid planning, making sure the forecasting is done well. The gentleman from EPRI spoke about the importance of forecasting and the ability for us to improve our climate change impacts. So all that goes into the planning side, focusing both on supply and demand side resources. And finally, the third bucket, which is how are we going to carry through those extreme events, even though they're like very short period. Here's a snapshot of how we are thinking about that from transportation electrification. In 2030, our transportation electrification load is going to be about 5% during the net peak time. That's in the evening, 6 to 8 period, when we lose all our solar. But as the energy is 10%, but the capacity is only 5%. But as you go towards 2035, that's going to be 10% capacity need. And that's something that we need to really make sure we're focusing. And what you're seeing there, 21 and 22, are just between 2 years, our forecasting has significantly changed. So what do? We align much of the charging to make sure it is in coincidence with the abundant amount of energy. So that's what we're doing right now is planning for charging infrastructure for about 8 million vehicles. And that is showing you, based on existing tariffs in California, what would be the charging pattern. And our job is to make sure those tariffs are done well to optimize that load on the grid. So that brings to a central theme of the conference today is demand flexibility. It's absolutely critical. And I think we mentioned this in the morning today. We in California are thinking about this in 3 broad buckets. Optimizing the load, that's where you have the rate structures and the load management standards. Arina just showed in her toolbox rates, and then she talked about data transparency. What load management standards do in California is require all the rates from all the utilities to be online and readily integratable to the devices. And then you have the clean resources that have to be both diverse in terms of technology type, but also geographically. There, the quick requirements we have are permitting. How do you permit to make sure you build fast enough, but also interconnect? Because we have so much need for new generation, right now we have 320 gigs of new resources in the queue ready to be interconnected, but we can't study that for interconnection. So that's something that we have to do. And finally, demand side, what do you do in these extreme situations? How do you carry demand flexibility as a critical tool to get us through those extremes? So Arina already mentioned this. We're looking at these 3 strategies, V1G, V2G, and V2B. So we're looking at making sure we have the charging infrastructure necessary for managing the demand, putting the electrons when we can, especially large loads. Like school buses would be a perfect example. And having the school buses charged at a certain time and be able to support grid. We have pilot programs that the school buses are currently supporting grid reliability in the evening periods. And finally, for those of you who follow the vehicle market, F-150 Lightning, it can carry your house for 7 days, right? Without having to connect to the grid. So that's the amount of storage we have on these vehicles, and how do we use that? This is my last slide, just kind of framing then, as we think about this, we're talking about electrification and demand management, as well as building new clean resources. But this transition planning has to be holistic as you think about the energy system as a whole. Just a case in point, California right now is struggling with very high gasoline prices, right? California has a very unique blend. Much of California's gasoline comes from refining in California. And as you rapidly electrify and reduce the demand for gasoline, those refineries are going out of business. And how do you manage that refinery transition as a part of your fossil transition? Similarly, natural gas. What happens with the natural gas infrastructure? And how do you transition the entire system out? And we're continuing to electrify end users. And the last thing I just want to highlight, which I talked about this morning, is really an equitable transition for all. As we move forward with this whole transition, we are holding on to fossil power plants just to run for 5 or 10 or 15 hours a year. And much of that fossil generation is in low-income communities and communities of color. So what do you do when you're trying to do good things for the society as a whole, but asking a small part of the society to bear the burden of the transition? So when you think about all those things, just transition becomes a very important element. So in California, we're trying our best to develop a holistic model. And I think we have the necessary tools, but it takes not only California, but all of us to exchange ideas and collaborate and work with each other to make it happen. So thank you, and look forward to talking to you all.
Thanks, Siva. It's fascinating to actually listen to someone talking about what's really happening on the ground. And that's actually what we're going to be moving to now. If I could invite Daniel Bowermaster to come up to the stage. He's the Senior Programme Manager for Electric Transportation at the EPRI, and he will be running this afternoon's discussion, bringing together different stakeholders and players from both mobility and the power sector to actually talk about the potential for integration of EVs in the power grid and how you do that in a smart way. Daniel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Bowermaster from EPRI, and just like my parents, when I started working at EPRI, most of you probably never heard of EPRI. So we're a nonprofit that does applied short and long-term research on the grid, primarily focusing on North America, but we do global work. EPRI's been around about 50 years, and our group has been working on electric transportation, big and small, for more than 33. So some of you might have seen a headline or heard the headline like, oh, EVs are going to crash the grid. Now, the good news there is that's not entirely true. Part of it, there's definitely spots on the grid that are easy to put megawatts worth of charging in and parts that are tougher. And what it basically kind of comes down to is time and cost. And that has a lot of complications like we just heard about from the California Energy Commission. So I'm very excited today. Our panel, we have 6 experts who will be offering their perspectives from everything from cities to vehicle manufacturers to startups to consulting companies. Regulators, distribution companies, et cetera. So I'll quickly introduce them, and then we'll have a nice chat up here. And I do recognize too that we're the last one before the meals and drinks later this evening. So we'll stick to the time. So first off, we have and you have to apologize my pronunciation too. So we have Gilles Dillen. He's the senior manager for investment with the city of Amsterdam. So Amsterdam, as you probably well know, is one of the world's leaders in electrifying transport, big and small. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Next up, we have Luis Cunha, who's from the Portuguese regulatory board. So he'll be sharing what some of the perspective that they've learned from the regulatory and the distribution side. The next, we have Henrik Engdahl from Volvo Trucks. And just like we just talked about, these bigger vehicles, the diesel-powered vehicles are numerically small, but a disproportionate share of not only energy, but then all the pollution that comes out of it. And carbon gets a lot of attention, at least in the US. What gets less attention, but is equally important, is all the other stuff that comes out the tailpipe that's really bad for you, all the particulate emissions and stuff like that. Now, that being said, trucks and similar vehicles are an important part of the economy, so this isn't just a trivial decision when we start talking about how to electrify these vehicles. Then we have Michael Mohnhaupt from the Mobility House, and the Mobility House is a leading edge company based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. He'll be talking about some of the great work they've been doing with their partners on smart charging. Then we have Gregory Poilasne, he's the CEO of Nuvve. Many of you probably have heard of Nuvve. They have done a lot of work around the world with smart charging pilots. Then last we'll hear from Jan-Peter Sasse, who's a regulator in southwestern Germany. So please join me in welcoming these experts to the stage. Did I miss something?
I missed something.
Oh.
I'm afraid I missed reminding everyone they can ask questions of the panel through Slido.
Oh, yeah. So please, there'll be if there's something up here, a link to Slido, that's for everyone here to give you the opportunity to ask questions. We have some questions prepared, we have some discussion too, but it's really important to get your feedback and input, and we'll make sure we take those. All right. So first up, on the outside, what is going on in Amsterdam? What have you learned? What's hard? What does this room need to know? What does this panel need to know? What questions do you have?
Well, we've had quite a successful endeavor so far with electric vehicles and smart charging options. Yet currently we're running into some issues called grid congestion, and apart from the very quick uptake in people with a high power purchasing level, we're now trying to get it more towards low-income households, etc. So the successes have been there, but it's now time to grow towards 100% penetration of electric vehicles and smart charging options.
Great. Maybe one point out of what innovation have you as Amsterdam either considered or implemented that has worked out, and what is maybe one area where it requires some more innovation, or what big problems remain to be solved?
So from the political side, there's a lot of emphasis on vehicle-to-grid technologies. We've seen that is not the whole equation for further rollout of smart charging. But what we did learn is that being able to pause or postpone the charging session in the charge pool will be very beneficial to the grid. And also as a municipality, to enable the companies that want to deploy certain innovations to help them and accommodate them, instead of setting very strict regulatory frameworks for that.
Great. Thank you. All right, moving on to Luis. So Luis, from the DSO's perspective, what do you see as the impact of EV deployment in your part of the world?
Okay, thank you. I promise this is the last time that I take part in a panel, because I was in the previous panel. Sorry for those that have to listen to me again. I think that is still a big question mark, what is going to happen with the impact of electric mobility. We have been doing some sort of rollout, also some kind of testing and piloting of different impacts. We have some studies also. I think if we think logically in rational terms, I think it's, as you mentioned, I think the fact that we can move the charging process from the peak hours to the off-peak hours is probably the main achievement that we can do next when it comes to electric mobility, because this is really what is going to impact right now, is the fact that we have simultaneously a lot of people trying to charge at the same time. And that is where the problem comes in, because I think it's very, very difficult to synchronize consumer behaviors in the market environment. So we can only be the market players to do that. Yeah. And there is no driver forces for the market players to do that, because they are not concerned about grid. So this is my main point. If we don't align all the attitudes, I think we'll not get there. So as far as the grid concerned, we also have some, because we are entering into the low voltage level, we have also some concerns. We need also to better digitalize our low voltage networks, because as you probably know, most of the SOs at least across Europe, have rolled out smart meters, so we know what happens in the edge, I mean in the connection between the grid and the edge. but we don't know anything further apart from secondary substations. So it means that we need to digitalize the grids to have a better understanding. What we know already is that losses are increasing because of this kind of devices connected to the grid. We are also seeing power demand capacity as a potential problem, and we are also seeing voltage problems arising. So again, I think, to not speak in technical terms, I think what is really needed is that we start cooperating, I mean, all interested parties, to make sure that we align consumer behavior, because this will be definitely one of the main driving things if we want to get easily the electromobility integrated. I have some figures I can share later on also that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, Michael from the Mobility House. Well, please share with us some of the smart charging projects that you've worked on recently.
We put these smart charging projects in basically 3 buckets. The first version would be kind of behind the meter optimization, you would call it in the US. We would call it probably retail optimization in Europe, where we manage typically a fleet of cars against the demand charge or against the tariff. Of course, always considering the fleet, the demand of the fleet, what kind of driving patterns. But it is purely behind the meter, basically. Then there are projects that include behind the meter optimization, but also have some wholesale activities. Maybe the Amsterdam Arena is a good example, where we have installed stationary storage, second-use stationary storage, do behind of the meter optimization, provide backup power, peak shaving, but if the time allows, there's no concert, there's no soccer game, we optimize against the wholesale market and make some additional money. And the third version is basically full-fledged V2G. Yeah. And in all 3 areas, we are beyond pilots, we are in commercial operations, basically. And our big challenge at the moment is to roll this V2G rollout commercially. You might have seen, or you might not have seen, the announcements in Europe from Renault, the big car company, the French car company. They announced their iconic Renault 5, the Renault 5, will come out next year with a full V2G package, including a bidirectional charger, 11 kilowatt, and we will be managing the V2G for Renault. And that will be, in the thousands of cars. Of course, nobody knows how customer acceptance is, but we will see. So these are this is our landscape, basically.
Oh, that's great. As they say, every great journey starts with one step, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a question for you, but also a question for the panel. Like, since you work in so many different areas in so many different countries, what do you see as some of the successful business models or successful market structures or regulatory structures that help this? I mean, this is with vehicles, it's new. You know, there's kind of some demand response and other similar programs, but using someone's vehicle is new. So, what have you seen that helps enable this? Because I know it's not easy.
Yeah. I can take that.
Yeah, sure.
So I mean, we started a V2G program in Denmark in 2016. There we've been using Nissan Leaf ENV200. And obviously the primary purpose for the vehicle is for somebody to drive it, so you need to make sure the vehicle is going to be ready for that. There's a battery also, right? So you need to make sure you're protecting that battery at the same time as you're providing those grid services. But in Denmark, we've been providing FCRN and FCRD grid services. Not only initially we've been generating maybe $2,500 per vehicle per year, but over the last couple of years, and especially this year, the pricing have been just going to the roof, and you get to the point where you pretty much driving your car for free at some point, right? Because and it's not very demanding. We're doing about a cycle on the battery every day, but it's not like one straight cycle. It's back and forth because it's frequency regulation, it's FCRN, and FCRD you have even less energy content. And this year I think cars have been generating about $5,000, if not more. The price sometimes went usually as a $30 per megawatt for an hour. It's been going all the way to $170 per megawatt for an hour. So the regulatory environment in the Nordics is pretty good, and has been a good place, especially to those more advanced grid services, which I think are more critical in order to solve the EV integration issue into the system. In California, we've been doing programs like the emergency load reduction program with school buses, and we've been participating in the chart that Siva showed From 2022, we were actually discharging buses when those events were happening. Gordon Newsom said, no, V2G is a game changer at the time. But I think it's maybe, those services are pretty simple. You're just discharging for a couple of hours, and therefore you are not compensated in the same way that we are in the Nordics.
Yeah. Michael, do you want to add something?
Yeah, maybe one thought. I guess we are talking today a lot about how we could help the network. I personally think the big prize is wholesale markets, not the network. Of course, there are situations where we can help the network with V2G. That differs by country, differs by region. But ultimately, V2G will be an important leg of the energy transition of the power system. We have solar, we have wind, and we need flexibility. And solar and wind are kind of almost a no-brainer these days because they are so cheap. But flexibility, that's the key. If we manage to get cheap flexibility, we don't need gas peakers, we don't need carbon capture, might not need hydrogen for the energy system, and we'll have a cheap power price. Mm-hmm. If we can't manage flexibility cheap enough, then we need all sorts of other technologies. But that's the big price. Or in other words, a country that connects 10 million vehicles will be better off than the country that doesn't get it. Because look at it in terms of full cost or marginal cost. Full cost, this thing is paid for. Mm-hmm. And marginal cost, we are competitive with stationary storage, of course. Mm-hmm. We are in some situations, we are even better. And if you take the German numbers, we could provide 50 to 100 terawatt hours with the fleet electrified, of course. 20 million cars are good for 50 terawatt hours. That's a lot of flexibility. I think we need more, but 50 is a good start.
That's a great start.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. All right. We're bouncing around here a bit. So, Greg, why don't you talk more about some of the work that Nuvve is doing?
Yeah, so first, I studied Nuvve with a professor, Will Campton, a professor at the University of Delaware, who is really recognized as the father of vehicle-to-grid. So I always want to thank him because he started to work on this in 1996. So a lot of us were probably not some of you were not born yet. So a very, very visionary on this and thought about all those aspects, right? Obviously providing the grid services. He always thought about aggregation and the speed of control of the resources, the ability of controlling them on a second-by-second basis, but without forgetting the idea that the primary purpose for the vehicle is for somebody to drive it at some point. And then also that there's a battery in that vehicle, and batteries, you can protect them if you work them in the right range of state of charge. You don't want to go to the extreme cases, and you want to monitor them very closely to make sure that you're not creating any issue. But so as I said, right, we started with light-duty fleets in Denmark, and now it's been more than 7 years that we've been running those vehicles, doing vehicle-to-grid. As I said, doing FCR-N first and then FCR-D. In the US, we decided to focus ourselves onto the school buses because, first of all, it's pretty cool to provide clean transportation to the kids on the one hand, and then also to help when you have peaks on the system. Just to give you an idea, right, there are 500,000 school buses in the US. They usually have a life of about 12 years, so it's about a replacement rate of 40,000 a year. So it's a big market. It's 24 million kids every day that are going through the school buses, the Euro bus in the US. And most of the time when you drive around the school bus parking lot, you see them parked, right? So those are great assets to provide transportation on the one hand, but also to solve those issues of the 6 to 9 p.m., the ramp up in the duck curve. And so we decided to focus on that. So we have a different program around the US. But the difficulty in the US is there's a lot of diversity across all the utilities. So emergency load reduction program in California. You have another program in the Northeast called Connected Solution. But then after joining to what Michael was saying, in Texas, for example, there's a lot of volatility on the spot market. And so the ability of accessing the spot market over there is very important. We overheard about the issues, obviously, that happened a couple of years ago in Texas during the winter. But there is always a lot of volatility. And there's a lot of renewable. There's a lot of solar, a lot of wind. And so sometimes, 14th of July 2022, there was a day where it was cloudy, no wind. The price went up to $6,500 per megawatt hour. It's super high, right? So those are great opportunities to solve those problems.
Right.
And we are touching in all those areas.
Thank you. So speaking of large vehicles, Henrik, you're the E-mobility Business Development Director at Volvo Trucks. How do you see the market? I mean, from our side of the ocean, it's changing so fast, even the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, there's still a lot of questions about what's the long-haul Class 8 truck going to be, what's the energy source there, but at least on what you see now, like, how are the big electric trucks working out? What kind of charging do they need? And then on the other side of that coin, what is the potential that you see for managed charging up into including, vehicle to grid using the large fleet vehicles?
It's interesting that you said around 3 years. 3-4 years ago, roughly, then nobody thought that you could do heavy-duty trucking at all electric. That was the first preaching mission we had from Volvo Trucks to say, well, it can be done, right? And now everybody's twisting and turning this and thinking, well, these are big vehicles, right? Will they work? Will they have the range? How will they evolve, and so on? And the usual message is, well, application by application, market by market. Not everybody will go electric completely overnight, which is quite similar to the passenger car situation, right? And we started off with the fairly small ones, more refuse-like vehicles or distribution vehicles operating mostly in a local context. Usually they can be provided with energy during the night. We kind of cheated a bit. We took the bus powertrain, we put it in a truck, and then off we go. Short time to market, and everybody's happy. Meanwhile, we were looking into the next segment of electrification, which is regional haul. Slightly wider scope, heavier vehicles. It addresses our main product, the main kind of vehicles that we are selling. And it is less regular. The former ones that are quite predictable, they drive the same range, the same route, a little bit bus-like. When you step into the regional haul, every now and then they go a little bit further, which creates a bit of a headache, right? Should you then buy a vehicle with a battery that every second week is being used? You need a complete battery. And this is what we're now trying to eke out a little bit. Well, how much battery should you have versus the amount of charging that you should actually provide during the day? And the conclusion is that, well, you need a bit of charging during the day. You need to, or you will have a better business case of stopping for those hours every second week than to buy a big battery for that covers all of your operation. Which leads on to the next level of tracking, right? Because when you start to have charging around for these regional vehicles, then the step towards long haul is not that bad, because it's the same kind of products. They do drive a little bit longer every day, indeed, but on the other hand, the driver also needs to have a little bit of rest. Yeah. And they need to load and unload their vehicles, right? So this is the kind of evolution that we see. And the second thing that also crossed our mind is, there are trucks that is running back and forth all the time, right? Yeah. Start and stop every day, which is a fairly substantial amount of transport being done this way. And this is then, say our product is around 250 to 350 kilometers a day, depending on range and payload and so on. We already do more than 800 kilometers in every day. Done it yesterday, do it today, do it tomorrow in several different kind of applications, right? And I think this highlights one of the things that goes into the discussion today. I had a little bit of a bad Tommy feeling when I came here, to be fair, because I cannot offer super much flexibility. The trucks are designed either to drive or to charge. Yes, there is a little bit of margin in this, but it's not that super much. But perhaps we can offer a bit of predictability instead. Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of smart things said during this morning session, right? But one of the things that I missed is that everybody thinks that building large is such a big problem. It's a bit of lead time and so on, but if you have use for what you build, then it's a fabulous business. If you can get your utilization up to a high level, then it makes sense to build all these grids and build all these chargers. And what I then can take to the table is an idea about, well, the logistics systems has a certain setup. It mandates a few things around this that will govern the traffic that we do. It will change slowly over time, but it's predictable at least. And this is perhaps something that could be of value to the system as such. Speaking in terms of vehicle to grid and so on and so on, I think we can provide a bit of the services. I think the frequency regulation part, where you take a tiny piece of time when you don't charge, that is fine. You can add a bit of load shifting, indeed, because there is a bit of flexibility during the night when you're charging. But there will be other parts that is much harder to realize.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of speaking for a continent, your point about the predictability of the larger vehicles is something that's very top of mind right now in the U.S. And there's major work going on with about nearly 20 utilities and truck companies and fleets, the big fleets, who are sharing the data such that the utilities they know where to invest first, based not only off of models, and models are important, but also down to the feeder level, such that they know, like, oh, okay, that feeder has capacity, and these six big fleets with their current vehicles and their plans, like, that's enough for now. But this feeder over here, they also have similar plans, and it's much smaller, so let's put our money over there first. And it's not just the money, but it's the people and the transformers, and it's a finite amount of resources. So it's less about, at least in North America, EVs bringing down the grid. It's like, but where do the utilities invest first? Because back to kind of the equity question, if utilities were to go out and just invest everywhere, okay, that would make the grid nice and strong everywhere, but that comes at a high cost for all of us customers, right? So your point about this predictability is very, very important, even before we get to the variability of the ongoing use of the vehicles. Thank you. All right, so last but not least, Jan Peter, what have you learned from your world about electric vehicles, managed charging? What do you wish to know? What do you want the...
Well, I think we learn a lot all the time because we are looking at the market very closely. And what I learned today is that Michael's thinking is very much in line with what we are thinking and working on at the moment. I think that's an important point you made, Michael, on providing flexibility for the wholesale market. And we are just setting up new rules that are exactly designed to do that for the lower grid levels. Mm-hmm. So what we are working on, what we wanted to make sure that every customer can go to the car dealer and buy a car, an electric vehicle, without being concerned, can I get a connection to the network? Mm-hmm. So what we said is, okay, we're going to need to set up rules where the DSO is obliged to connect everybody to the network. At the same time, the customer has to accept that in certain, but only in very limited ultima ratio hours, the DSO can actually reduce the charging process a little bit. And at the same time, the DSO is going to provide an incentive in the sense that there are lower network tariffs. And there's an option for the customer for a tariff system where there's a lower, a medium, and a higher tariff. Trying to provide what we said before. I think we saw that on the slide of Mr. Gupta very well. Maybe shifting the charging a little bit, that is better for the network. But the ultimate aim is really, and that's what you said, that those customers will be able to provide flexibility for the wholesale market. Yeah. Because what will happen then, we will see even higher simultaneities in the lower grid levels. And then we may need a mechanism where the DSO can say, okay, only in those very limited moments of time I can reduce, but for the rest of the time, the customer can provide flexibility to the wholesale market, and we believe this might be a very important thing for security of supply in the future.
Great. Have you seen from at least your experience or your position, whether it's within your realm or in another organization, like regulatory structures or market structures that have enabled smart charging, or ones that you'd like to learn more about as a possibility? I mean, I know we're in the early days and we're working our way through this.
we've seen pilots, obviously, also in Germany, where there's vehicle to grid in the reserves, primary reserve, and I think this is something that is a good idea. Where we like to learn more about is the other aspect. Michael mentioned it as well. Can we really use these mechanisms for congestion management in the grid? And this is not a clear discussion, you know. It also has economic problems when it comes to incentives, when it comes to the effect of the behavior of the customer on the grid. And what some economists say is, okay, if we build up a market where the customer can sell the flexibility to the grid, and at the same time, the charging pattern of the customer influences, if there's a constraint on the grid, there might be bad incentives. And some economists say that, and some economists say the opposite. And this is something where we as a regulator really need to learn more, maybe about mechanisms that can avoid that kind of behavior. At the moment, we are a bit careful when we are thinking about that direction.
That's a good point. All right, great. So we're doing good on time. Looks like we've got 15 minutes left. We'll pull up the Slido link here in a second, but maybe we have enough time to, oh, we already got questions. Good, thank you. I like this because it involves that one variable, us humans. So to what extent can human behavioral aspects be leveraged for decarbonization of road transport? This can go to anyone. How do you account for us as humans?
Okay, I'm sorry.
I didn't get the.
Oh, the question is like, given the fact that we're all human and we all have our preferences and different financial incentives will encourage us to do something, and if you look at the human population, sometimes if it's something that's easy to do, a lot of humans will do it, or if it's complicated, then fewer and fewer people will do it. So I guess what the question is like, how do you design a system or design a program or use technology and manage charging to account for the fact that we're all human?
Yeah.
I get some thoughts.
Starting from the grid's perspective, I think first we need to acknowledge that the situation, at least across Europe, is very different. So one situation in Germany, another situation are different countries. So in some countries we need to think in physical terms. I mean, is the grid able to provide enough capacity to charge simultaneously the vehicles? Maybe it's not a problem in Germany, but it's a problem in other countries. And it's really, really important to find clever ways to synchronize the behavior of consumers. So I'm also a citizen. I also own an electric car, so I don't want someone to tell me when I need to charge and when I don't want to charge. I think that we have the freedom to choose, but indeed we have also to know that we need to pay for that freedom. I think society will pay a price for that freedom. And for some, it will be reinforcing the grids. In other cases, I think we also need to be clever in the way we found technology acting on behalf of human beings. I mean, for me it's equal if I charge between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the night, or if it charges during 10 and midnight. If someone can do it for me and I benefit from that, I don't want to profit from that. I just want to make sure that my car is charged 7 o'clock in the morning. So I think this is what we need also to synchronize all these capacities of technology, to have market players providing solutions. And that is where I got a little bit afraid of this connection between wholesale markets and the vehicle to grid and these kinds of things. Yeah. Because that is a good statement if we assume that the network is there for everything. And that is the point for me, that we don't have enough capacity to assure that every scenario is possible. Yeah. So we also need to think about the possible scenarios. Right. So start thinking from the baseline. I think it's also important.
A comment on this.
Yeah, please.
I think what you just described is already there, right? I would say 85% of everybody owning an electric car in Sweden will have a dynamic tariff. And that has already blown a few transformers somewhere. So they had to impose some restrictions on how this can be done. But what is missing then, that's the price signal, right? Yep. There is no price for transferring power from one place to the other, which I think is, if implemented, then somebody will pick this up and find a way to...
But let me, if you don't mind, just 30 more seconds on this, because I mentioned this on the previous panel. I think in Europe, it's very difficult to align the price signals with the network tariffs, because we have at least two components in the price. One is the tariff to pay for the network use, another one is the commercial tariff.
Right.
And the commercial tariff is the one capable of driving consumers. Now, if I'm running a commercial business, do I care about the grid? No, not at all. So there is no driver for those running the business to really align things.
Maybe. Maybe there is, let's say like this, once we go to a customer and they want to buy a truck or 3 perhaps, they usually have a grid connection of 32 amps, something like this, for the office and the showers and whatever they have, a little bit of workshop. Comes 3 vehicles, that's 64 amps each at minimum, so it's quite a big comparison. I mean, the increase is quite big compared to what they had. And then the grid company would say, well, if you want a grid, then this is the way you will have to do it. And we have this, you have to shut down for a short time, right? And what do? You need the energy, right? And you're happy to get it most of the time, the vast majority of the time, compared to not having this at all. And this is the brutal way of doing things. Then if you can have, for those that already have a decent connection, some indication that perhaps it's better there than there. And if it doesn't make me a difference, then why should I care about this?
I think one of the points here is that it's complex, right? Yeah. And I think that needs to be simplified, right? To accelerate, to get rid of, because people are afraid of switching, right? Even fleet managers, they have to do it. But it's very important that things get simplified. And there's still, the good news is we still have a lot of work to get there. But I think the solutions are coming in place, in managing the loads locally, making, even though the capacity might not be fulfilling that whole load, having something that can manage it is probably one of the best ways to make it happen.
Yeah, Michael, look like you're going to say.
Yeah, I didn't mean to be disrespectful with regards to DSOs with my comment on wholesale. I really appreciate what you are doing. I mean, we are throwing in solar like there's no tomorrow, and then heat pumps, and basically tell the DSOs, yeah, please solve it. But nevertheless, there's a big price in the wholesale market. But if I would have a wish, I would say, if you have a constraint, please send us a pricing. Please tell us from 5 to 7, or there's an auction for the time from 5 to 7. You need some capacity, and we would, of course, be willing to bid. We all would be willing to bid. The interface should be easy, and I think through the pricing it would be feasible. And we have to work it out together, probably. But of course, we are here to help the grid as well.
And it's a DSO core business issue, right? I mean, the DSOs have been there to roll the wires and making sure that, I mean, I'm simplifying the job, but maintaining the transportation of energy all the way to the end of the channel. Now what you're describing is changing a role into a market maker, a local market maker, which they are not, I mean, not always designed yet for it. Hopefully this is the route.
Yeah, I don't see the DSO as really as a market maker. I think our business is to really provide you with good power quality and reliability, and that is the final aim of our game, I would say. Of course, if need be, we will be there also to do whatever is necessary. But I think in the end we should ask gentlemen there.
No pressure.
The DSO side, not really the DSO.
Don't you worry, I'm used to pressure. Before I answer to that point, Luis, I think actually we align very much one thing before on the behavioral aspect, because what we really learned with our procedures was there was a prior idea like 2 years ago from the prior government, which was really complicated, and it aimed really at being the best economic solution. And we said, okay, that was too complicated. We need something simple. We need something that works with 1 meter. We need an option for consumers to say, okay, I don't want anything to do with that can opt out, while others that are more enthusiastic, they can have a tariff that changes over time. And I think it's quite important to be in touch with consumer protection agencies and to understand what consumers really want. And then, if time goes by and people learn about opportunities, I guess that's the better idea than to start with something very complex that then maybe overestimates the willingness and the ability of consumers to adapt to those new situations. Going back to your place, I don't see the DSO. The DSO has a really important role here, providing the network, and we are giving now the DSO a new instrument, even to intervene to protect the grid, to keep it stable. apart from that, why would the DSO need to be a market facilitator or a market maker if third parties can also play that role? And what we have to make sure is, if you think about market on the DSO level, the lower we get on the DSO grid, the more issues we have about market power and about liquidity in the market. That's something also to keep in mind. There may be markets, maybe not so much on the lowest voltage level, we have to see, and I guess that there are third parties who are able and willing to provide services as a market maker if that is necessary. I think the DSO has a lot to do in the future, a lot of responsibility, maybe not so much being a market maker.
Let me just give an example, because it was something that was started in Spain several years ago. It's a tariff, a special tariff that we call PVPC. It doesn't matter. The only goal of the tariff is to link the wholesale markets and the price of renewables with the final price of consumer. And when the price was went down, I mean the price of renewables, people just moved to that tariff. But there was a tricky thing that if you want to go to that tariff, you need to move back from non-regulated market to the regulated market. So that gives us a notion of this conflict between the market, non-market issues. And that's exactly what I'm trying to convey here. So I think that as DSOs, we cannot just wait for the red lines and just switch on the red lines when there is a problem. Right. I think we need to plan in advance and make sure that we don't achieve the red lights. I think this is really what is important. So if need be, I think we really need to have a special tariffs, and those that have the electric cars that don't matter to charge in different times, they can apply to the tariffs. But we cannot impose those tariffs because we live in a non-regulated market, so it's up to the suppliers to decide on the final tariffs.
And I think this is super important, right? Yeah. Because somebody driving a truck will be willing to pay a certain price, a quite high price, to be able to take off the morning after. Yeah. Because the alternative could be really bad. They could be losing the contract with whoever they are transporting for, right? Yeah. And then for an hour of charging, maybe they will actually pay this money that is necessary. So the choice has to be there. Yeah. Otherwise, we will have a big problem.
Mm-hmm. That's great. All right, we have an Amsterdam-specific question, so I'll field that one to you. So the question is for Amsterdam. You do time shifting too. So how do you actually control the time shifting of the charging? What's the?
That's one for the DSOs and for the aggregators to do so. And we're lucky to have IRENA in the Netherlands, which is a DSO-led company specifically for the software and protocol development for all these communication issues. So it's either the balance responsible party or the DSO giving signals to those CPOs to either increase or reduce the speed in which they do it. We have to admit that the range of kilowatt options that there are on a charge point are very limited. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, talking about tariffs and smart charging, the Dutch TSO Tenet ran a blockchain pilot together with a challenger utility Vanderbron. Mm-hmm. And they created a huge pool of hundreds of EV drivers and owners, where the money made from the imbalance and ancillary services markets were divided back to the people handing over their charging protocols and basically their electric vehicles that were included in this program. And they've actually been struggling most with getting the right amount of megawatts into the bidding processes because, well, some people are driving, some people are not at one of those poles. But they actually quickly grew in terms of cars that were willing to contribute to the grid balancing services because the remuneration was quite high.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Henrik, you touched on this before, but the questions are, okay, you can use smart charging with small cars, but can trucks and buses really be used for V2G as they are parked less time with inflexible schedules, or is the only option they pay for grid reinforcement?
I mean, potentially, weekends they're standing still, then nothing is happening. But rest of the day is a utility, right? It's a tool for somebody that is doing their work. And yeah, probably they will pay for grid upgrades if they are to be charged and at this speed. what could be a small savior, perhaps, or a thing then is that this small, in terms of energy consumption, factory can actually be moved to different locations. So you do not necessarily have to stay, or sometimes you will have to be forced to move your operations to another place where there is a grid available. It is not very comfortable to tell a customer that, sorry guys, you have to put your trucks in another place. But sometimes this is actually the conclusion. We've seen it several times. But the energy is necessary. Everybody's working. The complete industry knows from the beginning that this ETA, the utilization, is the key. That's the key for every business, every trucker, right? Fill your cargo as much as possible, run as many kilometers as possible, and you will have the same conclusions for a grid connection. Use it as much as possible, and then the cost per kilowatt hour will not be that extensive.
I think,
Go ahead.
If the incremental cost of V2G is small, which is going to converge towards that, it brings so much more flexibility in how you are managing all the resources behind a meter. If you have a truck that comes back earlier, but it's not going to be the first one leaving in the morning, you still charge it right now, and then you can use that energy to rebalance the charge across all the vehicles that are in the parking lot at a later time. So I think it just brings a lot more flexibility, and what we were talking about, limitation on the distribution system, and how do you manage the energy behind a meter, rather than just brute force putting a lot of stationary storage, which are very expensive. This is a natural way of doing it.
Great. All right. What kind of retail tariff structures, time of use, direct load control, et cetera, have helped unlock this kind of managed charging or EV flexibility?
These would be remunerations for the consumers themselves, but on a regulatory framework, I'm not fully aware. I think there's other people in this panel more than down to comment on that.
So I guess the question is what rate structures or tariff structures have helped manage charging or vehicle to grid that you all have seen based on your global experience?
I think, of course, a dynamic tariff helps. And some certain values you can't just get without the dynamic tariff. And it's probably also good incentive for the customer to think about his behind-the-meter application. So if the smart meter is in place in Germany at some day, then we can have some those tariffs. Yes. I know in California it's almost done. We have certain hurdles still.
Yes, but for Germany, it's too easy to answer that question because we do not have the experience at this point.
Yeah.
But the new law, the smart meter rollout did not go as fast as we had planned in Germany. That is true. I give that to you. But a new start has been initiated by the legislator, and part of that law says from 2025 on, suppliers have to offer a tariff to the customer that is based on the wholesale market price. How they in detail will do that is quite open to the supplier. It's not an issue. I'm not talking about DSOs. I'm not talking about the grid. That was another story, network tariffs. But also the supplier will be obliged to offer that kind of tariff. And then we will see, do customers accept that? And we maybe see in the market, hopefully, what is the best structure. Because obviously what you also need is some kind of risk mitigation for the customer. Because you don't, I think somebody mentioned that before, you don't want to wake up in the morning seeing that you lost a lot of money while sleeping, because maybe there will be negative prices, that you have to pay. So you need maybe some caps, some floors, some intelligent mechanism, and these are something where we as a regulator actually think maybe something the market should develop and not be prescribed by us.
And I think that's why aggregators have a role there, right? Is to protect the consumers from those issues. I also think that an aggregator has a role because, then you're committing resources, you're committing capacity, then power or in energy, and that's really what the grid needs. Now, the grid doesn't need more volatility in terms of, there's good pricing to discharge right now, so maybe some people are going to be discharging while some others are going to be charging. I think the ability of committing capacity is going to be essential for the EV integration into the system and to keep the cost of energy equitable.
Yeah, just go back to the previous point. I think it was a very interesting comment from your side. We have faced this problem, and we are still thinking, piloting something on that, which is the fact that what is happening now with the renewables connecting to the distribution grids is that they are appearing in places where there is no demand. And I think you also need to have a good idea how to solve this issue, because so far so good. It's based on auctions and people can put it everywhere. But I think we need to organize, as a system, we organize also the place where we put the generation and also where we put the demand, if we can do it. And this brings me to this, I think it was mentioned 2 or 3 times during this discussion, that we are now start hearing about mandatory things, which was something not usual in our sector. That gives us a good idea that we are facing a scarcity and the problem of scarcity. And the only way that we find to solve this scarcity is really to make some things mandatory. So as a citizen, I don't like it, but being someone that is working on this sector for a long time, I believe that we should do something on that and try our best to make sure that when we invest on something that relates to electrification, we do it the most appropriate way.
Yeah. Okay, just as a time check, we have another 15 minutes for questions and we'll have 5 minutes for wrap up. So I know that's a little longer than scheduled, but I think it's a great discussion, so we're going to keep going. Here's a question on aggregators. So what are some of the challenges for aggregators? Does FERC Order 2222 in the US help? And you might need someone in the audience, whoever asked that question, to translate what FERC Order 222 is.
What is that?
Anyone?
No.
No, okay. All right, so here's a question on battery second use. How do you view the role of both vehicle-to-grid and stationary storage enabled by battery second use? So I guess the way I interpret that question is, do you see batteries, stationary storage, whether it's new or used, competing with or augmenting vehicle-to-grid? In other words, do they complement each other, or are they in conflict or competition, not necessarily conflict? What are the initial thoughts?
There are 2 resources meant to do the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. So of course there's a competition.
Yeah, in some situations they compete, but in other situations they probably do not compete. I can imagine situations with a DSO where it just makes sense and it's economically feasible to install a battery at a certain point instead of expanding the network, and that makes total sense, and this battery will always be in the money in this particular situation. No competition with V2G. In other situations there might be competition, but from what I perceive the markets are in, at the moment it's about growing the share of batteries, not about competing with the other batteries. And
it brings resiliency, right, also, right? I think in some cases you need that battery, I mean, because if the grid goes down, then you can still use that energy. So I don't think there's competition. I think it's just use cases that are different.
Yeah.
And that just needs to be considered when somebody's rolling out a fleet, or even a single homeowner putting a stationary storage in your house might make sense at the same time as getting an EV, especially when pricing you're going to get more.
And there are different kinds of batteries as well. I mean, exactly. we have something like 50 megawatts under management, but mostly second-use batteries, old car batteries that are still good for another 10 years. Mm-hmm. And this is a different price point, of course, again, so they are a little more competitive if set up properly than a new battery.
Yeah, something else, there was a question in here about getting the grid ready for the bigger vehicles, and something we're seeing just in pilots in the US, and I don't know if you all are in Europe or other parts, is some utilities are working through ways to do basically temporary, it's the wrong words, but bear with me, like temporary grid connections using like battery in a box on skids, or leaving like a small substation on skids, where as these fleets electrify, they might have a 5-year goal of 10 or 20 or 30 megawatts, but in 6 months they might need 2, or whatever that smaller number is. So it's like utilities are already prioritizing that 2 megawatts and they're working as fast as they can, but the timeline of when the electric trucks arrive from Volvo or someone else is still going to beat the grid. So now some of the utilities are proposing these like batteries, these like temporary, and again, that's the wrong word, but like bridging kind of solutions. So that might be a case where a battery would be better than, rolling in a bunch of school buses. But on the flip side, like in case of like emergencies or other times, like having mobile energy storage is, and being able to export that power is more useful than the batteries.
And there's one big difference. The fleet of vehicles is distributed, and typically the vehicles are where the economic activity is. So that's kind of a nice feature of this fleet. With a battery, you have always to make a decision about location. It's not that complicated in markets like Germany because the grid is kind of a copper plate, but in sparsely inhabited regions like Sweden, it's a different story, I imagine.
Yeah, we have less cables in total, perhaps, but
dig a lot of
the cables tend to end up where there's humans being or doing something, right? And this is where the vehicles will be as well. But I mean, I recognize the situation you describe. We I can sell you a truck afterwards. I put you early in the queue, and you will have it in 2 months. This quickly, you will not get a grid connection the size that you may need in order to charge it, or 5 trucks, that is. And then we need some intermediate way of solving this. Although the kilowatt hours will then become more expensive, of course, because they have to go in and out of a battery. You lose a bit in efficiency, you have to buy a battery, you need to depreciate all those things. So,
I think the chargers for the big Volvo trucks are not even the biggest chargers that are in place now. The biggest is, from what I heard, is a charger in Norway that serves a ferry boat at 10 megawatt or something like this. That's a number.
So you're right. Like cruise ships and ferry boats, I think, are the highest power transportation right now. So I think a couple of you touched on this, but battery life, what impact does V2G, basically exporting power have on the batteries?
Maybe I can take this. I mean, we've done a lot of work. We've been running, as I said, Nissan Leaf since 2016 and ENV200 in Denmark. We're doing about 1 cycle a day, doing frequency regulation. And we are very careful in terms of the range of state of charge we are keeping the battery into. We're also monitoring the temperature. We are watching the state of health of the battery on a regular basis, and we've really not have observed any impact. But a couple of things about batteries, right? Batteries are really impacted. Number one factor is time, usually. Then it's going to be the depth of discharge combined with the temperature, right? So if you have a large depth of discharge in a high temperature environment, that's really, really bad for the battery, right? Don't do that. And so if you know the environment, the temperature in which the battery is, you can manage keep the state of charge in the right place. To give you an idea, if you do full cycles, but you do that in 10% versus 100% versus 90%, you can do 10 times more cycles total, right? So batteries are really, if you know how to manage them, you can carry them for a longer period of time. In the case of school bus that are parked 3 months in a row every summer, you have deposition on the anode and the cathode when the battery is doing nothing. And so as those buses are parked 3 months in a row every summer, the battery actually is deteriorating even faster. So the ability of discharging the battery while the vehicle is parked actually can enhance the battery life. And we're actually working with some of our partners to provide battery warranty extension through that. So we're very confident that V2G does not impact it if you manage it and actually can enhance the battery life.
I think same experience. I'm quite sure neither Nuvve nor we would do any V2G if the OEM removes its battery warranty. Of course not. But they were quite concerned 5 years ago, but from whoever you speak to, they are not concerned anymore. They're absolutely fine with, let's say, 60 cycles a year, no problem.
We're hearing the same thing in the US where, again, 5-10 years ago, the automakers, understandably, were very concerned about the battery because they had to warranty it for 10 years, so they weren't about to do anything that would hit that warranty. But the batteries are proven to be so robust that it's working out well.
And the resilience is improving. This was one of the areas where they worked very hard. I mean, if you're going to charge a vehicle at 350 kilowatt, the battery can take a lot when you do that.
So this question sounds technical, but also has a pretty strong regulatory piece. So there's a question in the middle asking about what work is being done for V2G, both AC, so kind of slow charging, exporting power versus DC higher power. Like, what's been your experience, or what are your thoughts and/or experiences on AC versus DC V2G? And I realize that's a pretty technical question.
I can have my super quick answer. We will not have an AC charging.
There you go.
We have right now, but it will be gone. Because it doesn't make sense.
AC
Charging below 40 kilowatts doesn't make sense over time. The batteries do become too big.
Yeah. For us, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the project I mentioned with Renault, that will be AC. Other OEMs go DC because it's easier and they think it's technically the more advanced solution. It's fine. But of course, people who offer V2G would certainly do both.
Yeah.
And
I think AC in the consumer space will make a lot more sense because the incremental cost of AC is, at volume, a bidirectional onboard charger is same than unidirectional. I think the biggest question is more an interconnection aspect, right? Because now your inverter is moving around and the utilities hate it because they can't track it, right? So I think that's really more of the it's a regulatory question here about interconnection.
Great. All right, so I think what we'll do is we'll go. I want to make sure each of you has a chance to say, if you kind of close out your thoughts and make sure you each have a chance to say some final words to the end. So we'll start with you. We'll work our way across.
Yeah, we'd love to see larger charging plazas that are pointed to certain locations, like we saw with the solar PV deployment. Combining both heavy-duty charging with distributed energy resources and stationary battery systems. That will solve a lot of issues and bring us further down this path as well.
Great, thanks, Gilles. Luis?
Yeah, I think on the same line of reasoning, I think it's exactly what I've been saying, that we need to organize system bottom up. I mean, consuming what is generating locally and then moving step by step. And if we organize like this, we will solve at least half of the problems, I'm convinced on that.
Couldn't agree more, right? Given that what you're really aiming for is utilization, right? You want to use the equipment as much as possible, and you want to have as short cables as possible from production to consumption. I mean, after all, we have two basic things in here. We have physics that we need to take care about, otherwise it will not work, and we have people as well. And those also have to be considered in your charging process. Do you really want to go there to charge? Or would you rather charge at home? Because if they don't want to go there, then it doesn't make sense to build them.
Yeah. Great. Michael?
Yeah, I think I really think V2G is now there. I mean, we all did a lot of pilots, but it's now has entered a commercialization stage. And I might have a little wish towards the regulators. They do, in general, a very good job. I understand that they can't be that fast as a startup, maybe. But we only ask for a level playing field with other flexibility assets. That would be enough. I can say that because we have access to these wonderful assets full of optionalities, but we do not have level playing field in all areas. For example, double taxation in some countries, things like that should be removed, I personally think, to get the best out of the whole system. But overall, I'm quite optimistic that this is now getting more attention than maybe five years ago.
Great, thank you. Gregory?
Yeah, I mean, as aggregators, right, we are managing what I call highly unreliable assets, right? Because when you have an EV, at any time somebody might come in and plug the car or replug it, which create those big spikes on the system. So really, I see our job as working a lot on the prediction of it, and for that, having AI can do a lot for you in terms of predicting. As human, we are actually very predictable once you understand the patterns. And so the ability of predicting those resources, taking the commitment to the grid, and on what you're going to be delivering in terms of services. I think this is the only way this EV integration is going to happen smoothly, keeping the cost of energy equitable. I think that the biggest risk of electric vehicle is that they're creating all those peaks on the system. We just size everything up, but then the cost of energy will go higher even for people who can not even afford an EV. So I see that as an essential piece of what we are doing.
Great. Yeah, Peter?
Actually, I wanted to say something different, but the last point you mentioned was quite interesting, and that's also the way we see our work as a regulator. We have to make sure that the stuff that we do does not make energy more expensive for third parties that are actually not having the opportunities or the financial opportunities to be part of that market. As a regulator, we obviously see our job as enabling those kind of business models, and there we see that a lot of work needs to be done in the DSO and in the TSO networks. If we come to the DSO, the challenge that we see ahead in the next couple of years will be making our grids smarter, digitization of the grid, because all those things that we are talking about here will only function if the DSO knows what's going on in the network. And at least for Germany, I can say there's still a long way to go there, and obviously build the infrastructure at the same time. These are the challenges ahead.
Great. So we've heard a lot about the technical challenges and the technical victories. We've heard about the regulatory, some of the regulatory successes and the regulatory questions out there. You know, as you know, just like with the larger vehicles, and I mean even the light duty ones too. Like the questions now is like, how do we do this at scale? How do we do this big? And it makes me happy to hear the expertise and perspective of our panel. So please join me in thanking them, and we'll have Arina come up now and wrap up.